welcome to the Speed of Cyber episode 2, the number one podcast in the game when it comes to racing and ransomware. My name's Danny Hornigold, and today we're going to delve into the world of Formula One, look back at the Miami Grand Prix, and have a look at some breaking news of what's happening in the world of cybersecurity, as well as looking at some tales from the archive, some key moments from the history of cybersecurity, and a look forward to the Barcelona and Monaco Grand Prix that are coming up. I'm joined, as ever, by George Kurtz and Mike Centonas. Guys, you're just back from Vice City in Miami. How are things out there, boys?
Oh, it's fantastic. You know, we're going to cover Miami on the podcast here, but it was just a fantastic event. So happy to be back, and we've got our second podcast. We got some feedback on the first one. So, hey, we're new to this. We're just doing it for fun, and we're going to try to cut it down and focus on a few areas. We got some exciting areas to go through, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But I think overall it was a great event, and I can't wait for the second podcast.
Yeah, it was a buzz mic out there, but Mike, you were one of the first people on track, mate.
I was. George and I had the opportunity to get a few laps in with Bert Maylander, the safety car driver, legend. Yeah. And when the track was pretty green, so it was a little bit slippery, but what an amazing track! A lot of fun.
What was it like? For me, I just saw white faces of people coming upstairs once Byrne had thrown them around the track. But, we heard a lot over the weekend about the track breaking up and things like that. But it's very difficult for me to see looking down. You guys, what guys were out there? Was it a notable difference to a sort of traditional circuit?
Look, I'm sure George will have a view as a driver. I thought it was amazing, but I was obviously in a road car. But I get some of the criticisms. Very, very high speed sections. You get into turns 13 to 16, super technical. But what was interesting, it got really narrow. Like you kind of realize as you're going through the chicane that everything closes up. So I'd imagine in a wide, modern day F1 car, it's going to be a lot different, but man, it was a lot of fun. We were drifting. The AMG GTR in the walled section sounded amazing. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I thought it was an amazing track. I was a little bit mad that I didn't figure out enough that I could have driven the track if I raced in the Porsche Cup event. I'm not a Porsche guy, but I race Mercedes. Yeah. But heck, I think for that race I would have done it. I thought it was a great track. I mean, aside from some of the surface issues, I thought it was really cool. I'm just looking at the map here. So as Mike said, from 13 to 16 was super tight. I think everybody saw that. And, we're in the GTR branded CrowdStrike car when we were doing it. And Byrne Maylander, who drives a safety car, he's the coolest guy. He's bouncing off the curbs. And then you actually see the Formula One cars bouncing off the curbs, which normally you don't see. In a GT car, it just kind of soaks all that up. And it was pretty cool. I thought it was kind of tight down there, but it was actually a pretty high-speed track. A lot of big braking, and turn 17 was particularly slippery. They had to resurface that, and we down
at the hairpin.
We can talk a little bit about that. When you think about Formula One cars and the Mercedes, just kind of getting that right. Either get it right and it's great, or you get it wrong and you lose a lot of time, and those were some of the areas that I was focused on when I was in the garage.
It cost Valkyrie, didn't it? What a drive by Valkyrie, and that one mistake coming through there, just offline a tiny bit, and the car slips away from you, and he got driven past. He was so unlucky there, but it looked like you have to be so precise through there. It was
because they resurfaced
for him, really.
He needed to get some laps in with Byrne.
Yeah, Byrne did a good job.
He was narrating the entire lap.
Yeah, I reckon it was Byrne that ripped the track up.
What about the track surface, Mike? I mean, you've got a view on what happened over there. I think that was kind of behind the scenes, like a big issue.
Yeah, Danny and I talked a lot about that over the weekend. It's certainly an interesting one for Formula One. I mean, a lot of the drivers, I think Checo was pretty brutal and called the track a joke, and Fernando said it wasn't up to F1 standards. And basically what they were talking about was the track was made out of local lime rock and Georgia State granite, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong, Danny.
Yeah.
you don't normally see that lime rock in F1 tracks because it breaks down and then it polishes. So it's obviously not good for grip. It's not good for tire deg. But that local lime rock was a little bit different, but it was breaking up and it was getting like there was a lot of shards of glass just tearing apart the tires. So yeah, I don't know what they're going to do between now and next year. I think they've got to do a bit of work on that, but it certainly wasn't
I have a good
great
picture of the
from what I
track
could see.
that I took real close up. Maybe we can put that in and show that. But one of the things that I found
Yeah.
is that the tracks are just different in the U.S. and the aggregate is different in the U.S. than the Formula One tracks in Europe. And I've driven in the Formula One tracks in Europe, and generally they have a lot of grip. Generally, they're not as abrasive, and they drain a lot better when they get wet. And for whatever reason, our tracks are just more abrasive, and there's different temperature, swings a lot of times, and it was super hot. It was just really brutal on the tires. What I found was that the tires, I mean, I wasn't out there driving, but what I've seen was there was such a small window to get the tires right that either they were great or they were terrible, and that's why you saw people making different decisions on hard and soft, and whether they should, pit drivers or not, and keep them on the hard for a longer period of time. I think everybody was just learning.
Yeah, we've got a terrible analogy is the terrible analogy we use when we're describing what a circuit is like. We talk about Rice Krispie cakes. I don't know if there's a Australian and a US equivalent, but you put the chocolate in the flakes, and if there's a lot of bitumen, it means less bits in the track, and too much chocolate is a big contact patch. And then as you wear that out, you end up with too many Rice Krispies or whatever it was. And I think one of the things, I don't know if we spoke about this, Mike, but in order to artificially age the circuit, so you have to have laid that top layer, has to be laid at least 60 days before you go out and race in an FIA top class event. And they did that, but to artificially age it, they jet wash it. And it's like 36,000 psi. It's 2,500 bar of pressure they wash it at. And I wonder whether they just took it too far and went through it, because it sounded quite extreme out there.
Yeah, and I mean, it made for some interesting racing, right? A lot of the drivers were obviously complaining that if they got off the racing line, it was too slippy. They couldn't get much done, and there was obviously a lot of speculation before the race, before Sunday, that it'd be a bit of a procession. Everybody would just line up behind each other because they wouldn't go out wide. But there was some good racing, right? There was some interesting racing. The Fernando openly talked about the what do they call it, the lap where they went out beforehand just to sort of see the fans. He got a good view of the track, and he made that epic run on the first lap. So
yeah,
look, I think there's a lot talked about it. They'll get better at it, like a lot of things with the race. It was an interesting race, could have been a lot better, but I think that as an event, what a spectacle. It was amazing being there.
Yeah. It was. I think it's been easy for the press to sort of talk elements of it down, but we've been racing at Silverstone since 1950, and sometimes they still get the traffic wrong on occasion. So to hit the ground running and deliver what I think looked great on TV, and actually, do you know what? We all had a great time being there. It wasn't
Yes.
perfect. George, I think you said suboptimal in places, which I thought was a wonderfully articulate way of saying it. But it was suboptimal in places. But it was a great buzz as well, and I look forward to going back.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, for the first year, there were some rough spots, suboptimal, as we talked about, but I think it'll get better. And I think one of the areas, like, if you go to Monaco, you got a lot of stars. If you go to Miami, there were even more stars than Monaco. I mean, there was people everywhere. Michael Jordan was running around, and Michael Strahan and Beckham. It
Yeah, it
was
was
just
crazy.
absolutely nuts. And I think it really is going to be one of the premier spots for F1. And we talked about this with a lot of the folks in F1 and guests and drivers, everyone. There was a common theme, which was Netflix has been so good for the sport in the U.S. and it's brought many new people, many new fans, including women fans, into the sport because it really does focus on the the human aspect of it. In fact, I was having the conversation with Will Buxton just about that, and I think
Yeah.
you're just going to see more and more excitement at races like Miami and now Las Vegas because of it.
I don't know, Danny, if you ask George, whether he had a good weekend, I don't think he can say suboptimal. I went back and watched the replay. I saw more footage of George than I did of some of the other drivers. And now when I'm on social media, I keep seeing pictures of him in the Mercedes garage in the back. So
Yeah.
I think he had a good time.
Yeah, do you know, I was going to say when we first got here, I was going to actually say I think George was first one in, last one out every day. So definitely maximise. Do you know what? But before we jump into the news, actually one of the things we didn't discuss in the first podcast, and people have been asking me about, is George, we've seen you being interviewed for almost 20 years on cybersecurity and reference F1. But where did your passion start? Do you remember the first race that you watched? Is there a sort of a pivotal moment that switched you onto it? And what is it about F1 and motor racing that you love so much?
Well, I watched F1. Probably got into it in the 2000s, and it's probably when I had a DVR, if you think about it. I mean, I've watched it before then, but it was so hard because, it was like in the middle of the night for all these races, right? And I kind of grew up watching Indy and all the Indy drivers and,
Mm.
you name it, I watched it as a kid, and F1 was just a little bit harder. I mean, I used to watch the Indy races on a little 12-inch black and white TV when I was a kid, and then it was really cool. But once I was able to kind of start recording it and get into racing more, it became, much more of a passion. Now, the funny thing about this is, and I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but and you may know the story. I was actually putting a deal together when I was at McAfee with Mercedes, right?
You said,
And
yeah.
there was a sort of a little known guy now called Zach Brown, who was helping me. He actually worked at a company called JMI, which is a marketing company. And we had the deal put together when I was at McAfee to actually sponsor Mercedes. And then we got bought by Intel and the whole thing fell apart. And that was really just when, I mean, think about the timing, right? It was Schumacher and Rosberg, and then the rest is history in terms of the tear they went on. So it would have been really great to get in then as part of it because, when you think about racing is fun and it's a great passion, but on the business side, we've generated a tremendous amount of new business and customers and brand exposure because of it. So we'll be able to combine technology and racing, which is why we have the podcast here, right? Tech, people like tech and racing. But that's how I got, really early on in my, early on in my tech career, how I got involved in Formula One.
Yeah, you look at the investment with Doralton and Williams. They've used it as a platform to help with some of their tech investments and the work that they're doing. They're using their investment within Williams to help bring people to the party because they're working with so many tech businesses and they know it's a great area for those people to be. So, it makes this make so much sense. Mike, maybe we'll jump on with you later. Do you know one of the things I forgot to tell you guys? I don't think I mentioned this in Miami was when, Mike, you were talking about the circuit breaking down and the things that happened. Did I tell you about Dallas 84? What happened in Dallas?
I'm trying to remember, but no.
No, no. So it's a very similar thing. They turned up in Dallas. The track was ripping apart. There was a Can-Am race the night before, and they were 1,000 horsepower per ton. That ripped the track up to the point where they were using diggers on the track the morning of race day, digging up the asphalt and putting in quick dry cement. So they had to race early because it was too hot. They raced at 11 in the morning. So reminiscent a little bit of these pop-up US Grand Prix. But the reason I tell the story is Ayrton Senna in the race, cut a very long story short, crashed, I think on lap 46. And when he went back to the pit lane, George, I'm sure you've never binned it. But if you do, I'm sure there's the odd excuse that comes up. And Senna gave, I think, an excuse that can never been have used before. He said, I can't have crashed. It's impossible. The wall must have moved. And Pat Simmons, who was technical director at Tolman, said, what? He said that the wall moved. I'm telling you. Anyway, after the race, Pat Simmons went out to where Senna crashed, thinking, I've never heard that excuse. And the track was made up of concrete barriers. And sure enough, there'd been another crash further down the line. It had nudged the barrier by about 8 to 10 millimeters. And that 1 centimeter of difference on the next lap as Senna got to it was the difference it made for him. That's how accurately he was driving. But yeah, the track stuff just reminded me of that story, and I thought shows you the great genius of Ayrton.
Well, when you see these guys drive, it's just like the precision in the pit stops, the precision on the track. It's just crazy. what they're able to do. But at some point, Danny, we got to talk about this Aston Martin AMR Pro.
Yeah, well, let's jump into some news then, George. We're doing a news section. You are our breaking news, because we've read about it, we've seen all the big bloggers talking about it, anyone else, but the media have only just got to grips with it, and you were there on sort of media day at Homestead with the new Valkyrie AMR Pro. Just tell us a bit about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to go out there and just wow. I mean, that's all I could say. This is just an incredible car. It's a P1 car with an F1 sound. And Andy Prio was our test driver, and there's actually 2 seats in that. You could see the video. I mean, it's just, first of all, it's gorgeous.
Yeah,
Second of all, it looks like a Formula.
it just looks
It's
insane.
insane. The aero, the fins, just the downforce. It was crazy. So we went out there. We got some hot laps with Andy. As I said, if you can believe, you can actually fit 2 people in there. And we're
Yeah.
seeing it take off. What's really cool is that, and they built this for the LMDH kind of program, if you will. You had to have battery power to leave the pits, and it actually goes up to,
Okay.
like, I think it's 17 miles an hour, something like that. And then it bump starts. So when it takes off, it actually is battery power and then bump starts itself. And when you hear the sound go by, I mean, it's just incredible. Mike, you were there watching this thing. What do you think?
I gotta tell you, it puts the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It's what F1 cars should sound like, and it takes you back to an old F1 era. It was just amazing hearing it on the backside of the track. I mean, it's amazing when it's coming down the straight, but you can just hear it wailing. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, though it's 11,000
Yeah.
RPM, 6.5 liter V12 built by Cosworth, 1,000 horsepower, under 1,000 kilograms. I mean, it was just, it was incredible seeing it. And then you go to the F1 race and you're like, oh, okay, great racing, but that sound, it's just
Yeah.
unmistakable.
I like it because when you work in F1 now, you can sometimes talk over the cars and be heard. Whereas with this thing, you got no chance with that. With that V12, it's monstrous. George looking pretty pleased as punch at the end of the day there with Mr. Prio. That's the first time you've been happy with a member of the Prio family, isn't it?
Yeah, so funny enough, this year's Daytona in the P3 car, we were in second place, and we had some suboptimal calls on the strategy, shall we say, right? And it turned with safety cars and everything else, and it turned out that we were in third, and Andy's son was in second place. So, as much of a legend as he is, I got beat by his son. So,
Yeah.
we kind of had a bit of a laugh about that. But when you think about the car, and let's just put it in perspective, this is a V12 that's 11,000 RPM.
Yeah.
Like, this is crazy, naturally aspirated.
Yeah.
And so Andy said, look, let me know what you think of the car. What kind of stands out? And obviously, I mean, I drive prototype cars, so these are high downforce, great braking, those sort of things. But when you look at the carbon brakes on this car, I would say the thing that stood out most was the braking was just absolutely insane. I think it was 4 or 5G. It was almost like F1 braking. I mean, it literally is like an F1
Yeah.
car underneath. And what if you get somebody who hasn't been in a track car or something, like, their whole head, everything goes forward, and they sort of
Yeah.
like, they can't believe how late and how hard you could brake. That wasn't the case because I drive other cars, but it still stood out as, like, that braking is so late. It is so hard. And,
Yeah.
when you see like Lewis Hamilton in the drivers, when they brake, their whole neck goes down. I mean, that's pretty much like what it was. And he wasn't really even pushing the car. He had it turned down to, 700 or 800 horsepower. But I got to say, absolutely insane. Mind blowing.
Yeah. Did they obviously I was going to say the normal Valkyrie, but I don't think you can use the term normal. But obviously, the normal Valkyrie has got active suspension. It's got active aerodynamics. As all of that crossed over, and I know they lengthened the wheelbase, widened the wheelbase as well. But have they taken any of that active
I
aero
don't
out
think
or
the
not?
active aero is in the track car. I think they had to do that for street tires.
Yeah.
And I think with slicks, you
Yeah.
don't have to do that. So it's like full on aero. They don't need
Yeah.
the active aero. Just sticks.
It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing that you can actually buy that car and obviously if you can afford it, and then use it as a track car and just go
Yeah.
out. And George talked about the different race modes. You can on the steering wheel 600 horsepower, 700 horsepower, 800 horsepower. If you're brave enough, 1,000 horsepower. But I got to tell you, watching it go around the track, it's got to be some driver that's going to firstly have the guts to go 1,000 horsepower in that thing, and then also have the skill to do it. It's
Well, and
mind blowing.
Yeah.
yeah, I
So
was going to say,
Mike,
Danny, it has really good TC and
go
ABS.
on, George.
And I was talking to Andy about it. I said, "Oh, you got, there was a turn." I said, "You got." I felt the TC kick in. He goes, "Oh, you felt that?" I go, "Yeah, I felt that," but it was still pretty good. And it was a good lap. And I
Yeah.
think to Mike's point, it is
Yeah.
a really drivable car. I was talking to the Multimatic team, which really helped build it, right? And I said, "Well, what do you have to do? How do you start it and prepare it? Because even in a GT3 race car, you've got to put it on the stands. And you got to warm up the transmission, the engine. Obviously, the F1 car goes through a whole different, set of warm up." A little bit of warm up and it's pretty much good to go. And obviously you got to get the brakes up to temperature because, they're carbon, but, I mean, it was pretty user
Yeah.
friendly.
I just love the name. I thought they'd run out of cool names for cars, but the secret name was Nebula, which was pretty cool. And then the Valkyrie's almost better. But I spoke to one of the team who've been involved in development earlier today and said, look, you're obviously using ground effects and Venturi tunnels in the car as you've moved towards the sort of higher performance track version. Any issues with porpoising or? And they
Nothing.
said, no, nothing. Just said like even at that level, you run an F1 car so low, so aggressively, they didn't experience any problems in development with any porpoising. So, yeah, just a curse of F1 at the minute, it seems.
And Mike, I think there was some stats they were giving us of how close they were to the F1 car speed in Bahrain. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it wouldn't have been up the front, but it wouldn't have been embarrassed either, which is the amazing thing. I mean, as you guys said, right, this thing was built for Le Mans. It would be competitive, pretty straight out. It's designed to be as fast as, if not faster than, an LMP1 car. It's just incredible. But I mean, look, it's pretty cool that there's a lot of manufacturers that are coming out with track day cars. So it's not a bad time if you've got the opportunity to get in one of these things or to own one of these. I think you had a picture there of the seat, Danny. There's a reason why I was not in a race suit, because I'm not fitting in that seat.
That's pretty tight in there, right? It's pretty tight. We'll get there, Mike, and then I'm sure we can speak to Mr. Andy Prio and get a go. And you said if you can afford one, it's good. They're only making 40 plus 2 prototypes, but I think if you can get your hands on one, fingers crossed, you're not going to lose money on them, are you? They're not making any more cars like that in the future, I don't think so. Brilliant. Guys, I think it's time I've got to make you do a bit of your day job. We spoke last time about my naivety but fascination with a bit of cybersecurity, and I've been back down the opening the rabbit hole and heading down it since we last spoke. And just a couple of things that I've noticed. Well, I mean, there's so much going on. We could go anywhere, and feel free to do so. But starting off, we've obviously, certainly from a Western perspective, heard so much about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and attacks coming in a westerly direction as such. But things taking a bit of a turn, even down to saying Russia's equivalent of YouTube having some blackouts as such. What's been going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot going on, and there's obviously a lot of concern still going on with what's happening in the Ukraine. But there's a lot of interesting news from a cyber perspective. As you mentioned, Danny, the Russia's YouTube, their version of YouTube was taken offline for a few days during the Russia's anniversary celebrations, and I think someone really obviously wanted to prevent YouTube from showing the Victory Day parade and the fireworks, and there's a lot of speculation that probably our YouTube will never recover. But then a lot of Western governments, the US government as well as European governments, have come out to say in the days leading up to the invasion there was a pretty significant cyber attack, and the attack was focused on Viasat, so a company out of the US that provides high-speed satellite communication services, and it's heavily used by the Ukrainian government. So yeah, look, there's a lot of things to look at to investigate. Our researchers are certainly busy, that's for sure.
Yeah. One of the things I think that surprised me reading the security news over the week is this sort of headline, Costa Rican President Rodrigo Chavez declaring this state of national cyber security emergency. And I guess one of them is, why is Costa Rica being targeted? But the other part of the question is, well, A, what's going on there? But the other part of the question is, do each government not already have sort of CrowdStrike, or I was going to say equivalent protection, but maybe that's unfair on CrowdStrike. But CrowdStrike-esque protection, should we say? Do people not? Does every government not have that in place?
Well, it's a good question, and I think when you look at governments, whether it's kind of at the federal level, at whatever country, state, local, they always tend to lag, and it takes a while to get into those organizations, and they're typically use legacy technology. And one of the challenges you see is that there's a lot of organizations, kind of legacy security companies that were focused on preventing, malware as opposed to preventing breaches, right? And there's a big difference. And if you look at like the Conti ransomware that was being used, a lot of it looks like nation state activity. You have these e-crime actors that break in, they understand the network, they understand how to distribute the software. They're basically stealing data before they encrypt it, because, by the way, if you restore from a backup, they'll just extort you from a data perspective, where they're going to leak that data. So you really have to have a different mindset, which is not just stopping malware, but it's stopping the breach and stopping the planning of the malware, and then being able to leverage things like artificial intelligence to actually identify these very unique pieces of malware that come as ransomware as a service. And Mike can talk a little bit more about ransomware as a service, but you can get any high school kid to be able to implement a ransomware campaign, because it's all a SaaS-based offering with the bad guys.
Yeah. Where'd they go, Mike? I mean, say I think the initial targets are back in April the 18th. We're a long way beyond that now. I can't imagine either the damage that's been done, or, as I say, a state of national cybersecurity emergency. Where's the way back? What can they do from the position they find themselves?
Look, I'm not that close to what happened there, but I mean, it's a big thing when the president declares a state of national emergency, and that ransomware that George talked about, Conti. I mean, that's crippled their government. The Ministry of Finance has been hit. Minister of Labor and Social Security was hit. A whole range of different departments. So they've had a big part of the government there. I think the Treasury Department has not had any digital services. And I think, what's interesting, if you look at what's going on with ransomware right now, a lot of governments around the world are suffering, a lot of state and local governments, a lot of businesses are hit with this. You look at Formula One as an example. There's so many cybersecurity companies involved in Formula One right now. There's so much reliance on data. There's so much reliance on the internet. You can't just jump in a car and drive and win a race. There's so many other things that come into it. Imagine a situation where, as the lights are about to go out, suddenly everything goes dark. You're not going to have a race.
Yeah.
So many people are getting hit right now. As you said, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. What is it? Is it easy money? Is it, what are the main, if you I don't know if you can put it into a percentage, but I'm thinking there, you talk about the lights going out. I'm thinking, we're off to Singapore in the not too distant future. We need those lights for F1. But yeah, who are the main actors, I suppose, with these ransomware attacks?
Yeah, there is so much money. I think you nailed it, right? There's so much money to be made, and I think George touched on it before and said it perfectly. It's easy. It's not hard. I've been doing it for a while, and you go back to the early days when I started my career. It wasn't easy to develop ransomware or develop cyber attacks. It wasn't even ransomware back in those days. It took very, very capable people. Today, you just need a bit of money, and you need to be brazen enough to pay somebody to do it on your behalf. You do a little bit of revenue sharing, and away you go. So it's all about money today, and attackers are finding innovative ways to monetize their victims, and it's quite fascinating the way that they work.
I think.
Low risk, lots of money, Danny.
I mean, I'm not encouraging it, but that sounds like something I'd be interested in. But I couldn't get past CrowdStrike anyway, so there's no point me trying. But I think on the pod we talked about the idea of racing and ransomware. We weren't going to do public service announcements, but I guess at the end of the news section we've got to talk to me about a 0-day Tuesday and what's going on.
Yeah, I love the term. Actually called Patch Tuesday, but
Okay.
it's another month. We affectionately call it Microsoft 0-day Tuesday. And I guess as a general service announcement, this month was a big one. 74 security vulnerabilities, including another 0-day. And the reason why we kind of call it out is it's actively being exploited in the wild. It's tough out there. You've got 7 critical vulnerabilities. 66 of them are important. It's just another month where people around the world are rushing to patch. And it's not just Microsoft. There's a whole range of other things that they need to be thinking about. It's tough. It's certainly not an easy job in cybersecurity these days.
George,
Hey,
Mike's given the CTO answer. What's a 0-day? How do I stop it?
You can explain that, Mike?
I thought that was one for you. I thought
it's for you, George.
Oh, for me. Okay.
You had all the fun in the Valkyrie, so you get the tough questions.
I didn't. Yeah. So it's a good question. So 0-day basically is a vulnerability that can be exploited that really doesn't have a patch. So in general, you have we'll take nation state actors. They sit in a lot of 0 days. So these are vulnerabilities that are exploited that nobody knows about. So they're not patched. And when these patches come out, everybody kind of knows there's a problem. They reverse engineer the patch, what was changed, and then you have all these exploits come out. So it's wash, rinse, repeat. It's a pretty well known, what happens in the security world. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask Mike about was ICE Apple, and that was something that the CrowdStrike threat hunting team had found and talked about, basically a kind of a framework to maintain persistence in an environment under the IIS context, which is the web server context for Microsoft. So, Mike, what do you know about that?
Yeah, it's another interesting one to touch on, and I guess this just goes to a lot of the research, a lot of the work that we do, and it's just another day in the life of. And it's the ICE Apple framework. Is a toolkit. We kind of refer to it as a post exploitation framework. So it's something that we detected late 2021, and we've seen it in a lot of victim environments all around the world. So we've seen it in the tech sector. We've seen it in government sectors, and it's interesting. It's a framework that's under active development. We see it deployed on email servers, Microsoft Exchange servers. And, we've got some interesting papers, but basically what it helps an adversary do is maintain a real low forensic footprint. So they can be on an infected host. You use a framework like this when you've got a long-running objective. So if you're doing intelligence collection, if you want to do sort of low and slow style of attack where you're just taking a little bit of information at a time, you use a tool like this. So super smart. It's got a number of features to help evade detection, to stop people from catching it. And when we look at the toolkit and the tradecraft, it looks like it's been developed by an adversary with a lot of deep knowledge and inner workings of the platforms, the systems that it works on. But yeah, we came across the technology. We've seen how people use it. We've been actively helping organizations to detect it and remove it and remediate it. But it's just another classic example of the type of stuff that we see.
Is unbelievable, the stuff you see. I think it's just given me an idea because it sounds like it's out of a movie. So going forward, guys, I'm going to pick some moments in movies where ransomware and attacks have happened, and you're going to tell me in the future whether it would be doable and how you'd stop it from a movie standpoint, maybe. But I thought it might be nice to jump into some correspondence, the pigeon post, the telegrams, the letters, millions of them. But I'm going to go to David Lucci in the one comment on YouTube. But very, very complimentary. One of the things that really interested me, in fact, George, you mentioned earlier about one of the support races in Miami, and maybe it would have been nice for you to jump into one of those. But actually, David just saying that George mentioned L2 anonymous cars in the last podcast and started trying to look into it and racing series, but there was just nothing out there. And said when looking at electric cars came along, that was fun. Maybe we can bring autonomous cars in to diversify racing as well. And can you imagine how many insights and technology could come from these initiatives? What's your thoughts, guys? So, question from David Lucci. I love the idea. We were meant to have Robo Race support FE, but it never really happened. What do you think?
I think it would be fascinating, and I certainly can see it happening in the future of being able to program the car and whoever has the best AI wins. I think that's kind of a technology meets racing, which is cool. Obviously, I think the human element is still more fun, and hearing the cars roar is really exciting to me, and smelling the cars. I mean, I still like all that. So I think there's a place for autonomous racing and electric racing and all those things. I guess I'm still an old diehard. Like the smell, like the sound, and look forward to.
Well, I got no chance with Mike. He's been going on about the 6.5 liter V12 Valkyrie, so he's not going to be having this. But what do you reckon, Mike?
Look, we're not actually that far away. George and I were in Sebring. I was watching him. Sebring? We were in Sonoma. I'm getting all my racetracks confused, but I keep going through all these bucket list racetracks. But we were in Sonoma, and I was chatting to a couple of people from the University of Alabama. So actually, a few days ago, they set the a record for a driverless speed record. So I think they had an Indy car that had been modified, no one in it. They set a record of 192 miles per hour on the NASA runway at the Kennedy Space Center. So they're doing some interesting work. It was actually pretty cool talking to them, and they've got a modified Delara, and they're just doing some amazing stuff. So, people sort of think that it's, why does that matter? But you can kind of see some of the things that they're trying to solve, and they're trying to make it safer. There's some pretty cool stuff going on out there.
Yeah.
I wonder though, George, for you, you're the race driver amongst us. Your fastest ever lap, the best qualifying lap you've ever done, were you on the limit or just over the limit? And how could a computer work out that difference between being on the edge of adhesion and just dancing across the barrier?
Well, it's a good question, but you have to ask whose limit. So, it's probably above my limit, but not above the car's limit. When you, unless you're beating a pro guy like Colin Brown, who I race with, and a good track, I'm within 2 seconds of the guy. You're just not, right. There's always more to it. So I think part of the challenge is you create your own limits. Like if in the GT car, if you over brake, it becomes really pitch sensitive and you actually lose grip because the platform is not flat. And there's a real technique to keeping the platform flat and going faster, right? So, for me, I always try to stay, at my limit and maybe just a smidge over. But obviously, when you see the full pros like Colin and others, just kind of different level. But it's fun being out there with them, and you always got to keep trying and keep going faster. But I know one of the things
I remember.
You probably
go ahead.
I was going to say, you probably remember, Danny. Was it Singapore where Lewis did that amazing quali lap where he beat what they thought was theoretically possible? I mean, that's when that's pretty cool.
So we both went to speak at exactly the same time and to say exactly the same thing. So it was either 18 or 19, exactly that. And Lewis did, it's a track that Mercedes hadn't been traditionally quick at in the modern era, despite dominating the modern era. And Lewis turned up and did maybe the lap of his life, certainly one of. And the engineers afterwards said, look, the physics model says it should, even if you do every corner perfectly, you brake as late as possible, the car is touching the wall around every corner. Lewis was 0.003 of a second faster than the physics say it's ever possible to go in these circumstances. So it just shows, can you go beyond the edge? And I think probably not very often. You remember Senna said it in '88 about Monaco, that you just get lost into that world and you step beyond the realms of possibility. But yeah, it's funny you think of exactly the same example as me when I think of someone being able to do that, Mike.
So Danny, we
superb.
probably
We have to see if we can get him on and ask him about it.
I know one of
Yeah.
the things, Danny, we talked about some feedback, just keeping this a little bit shorter, so we probably should get wrapped up here. And we have had some questions. Well, what's the podcast all about? Why are you doing it? We're doing it because it's fun. We like talking about racing and security.
Yeah.
And reality is we want to get some really cool guests on here too. So I think the more comments we get on what people like, what they don't like, what they want to see, we're probably fortunate enough to be able to have some really cool guests on this show that we're already talking about behind the scenes. And, so we get those comments and, we'll work on the next one. But we only do it because it's fun. And we like talking about racing and cars and security.
Yeah, we'll have well, maybe then we got David's question about from Tales from the Archive. Maybe we save this one for the next time. I want to know the Otto moments. That's the thing I'd like to know about cybersecurity. The moment that you got off an aircraft and you turn your phone on and there's that Otto feeling when the news is suddenly there. So maybe we talk about that going forwards.
Yeah, let's save that for the next time because nothing good happens before 5:00 on Friday, and I have plenty of stories to talk about.
Yeah.
So next up in Formula One, Barcelona, Monaco. Plenty to look forward to, guys.
Monaco is that's the crown jewel of the whole season. Can't wait for it, and we'll see who's bringing upgrades and what changes can be made. But I think we kind of know the running order this year and the cars and the folks involved. And like anything else in Formula One, it's you're only as good as your last race.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think we'll have a lot to talk about on the next one. I mean, it's rumored that Mercedes is going to be bringing a lot of upgrades for Barcelona, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I thought they had there was glimpses over the weekend in Miami, so fingers crossed we get to talk about what happens there, and then Monaco. A lot of good weeks of racing, and George, you're behind a car soon as well, so a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
yep.
I'd imagine the trucks that leave Europe or leave the UK in a few days' time are going to be packed to the rafters for every team with upgrades. We'll know soon enough who's done the best job. Guys, thanks so much. It's been brilliant catching up with you. Again, I'm looking at my watch. I could carry on all day, but George says leave them wanting more, and we'll do exactly that. So thanks so much for tuning in to the Speed of Cyber episode 2. Make sure you like, subscribe, and also get in as many comments as you can, whether it's feedback or you've got some questions for myself, George, Mike. We look forward to coming back to you with the next episode very soon.